Hello, and welcome to your next flipped lecture. Today we'll be talking about citizenship and immigration. When we think about citizenship and immigration, oftentimes these images come to mind. We think of the Statue of Liberty, we think of Ellis Island, hallmarks of the United States immigration system. For decades, people would come to this country and these would be the sights they saw before they came into the U.S. So let's explore that. Here we see a political cartoon, kind of showing the irony of some of the current immigration debate, where here we see Plymouth Rock and the early Indians trying to keep out the pilgrims of, centuries ago. The caption says, "They say they're building a wall because too many of us enter illegally and won't learn their language or assimilate," which means to adapt, into their culture. So it's kind of a satire of what is currently going on in our immigration debate, mostly with our southern border with Mexico. There are three ways to become a U.S. citizen. There's law of soil. Simply put, if you're born in the U.S., you are a U.S. citizen. There's the law of blood. If both of your parents had to be legal citizens and legal residents, and if they were, then you are automatically a U.S. citizen. Or one of them could have lived in the U.S. for 10 years, 5 of those years having to have to be after the age of 14. Or there's the naturalization process. This is the process by which you become a citizen. Here we see Arnold Schwarzenegger, who immigrated into our country. We know of him today as a successful film star, but also as the former governor of California. He is a U.S. citizen. He immigrated into the U.S. and went through the naturalization process to gain his citizenship. Some key terms that you should know. Resident alien, that is a legal resident with established residency. We have many immigrants in this country who are allowed to be here, who have their proper identification and documentation, and they are here for a long period of time. Then there's non-resident aliens. They're not expected to establish residency because they're only in the U.S. for a short period of time. Business purposes, travel, a number of which. Think about it going on vacation or, going on essentially a business trip. Then we think of enemy aliens. Not enemy aliens as in we think they're our enemy or they're at war with us, but that they're at war with their own country. This is what we call political refugees. If someone is going through a civil war or some kind of persecution back home, the U.S. is usually sympathetic to that. They want to let them in. Then we think of what's called an illegal immigrant, or more politically correct, an undocumented worker. This is someone who has no papers or legal status. They came into the U.S. illegally, but reside here and live here. However, they are technically not allowed to be here. Then there's naturalization, once again, and that is the process of becoming a U.S. citizen. In order to become naturalized, to come to the U.S. and become a U.S. citizen, although you were not originally one, you must have 1. Enter the U.S. legally, 2. Possess good moral character, 3. Support the U.S. government, and 4. Be able to read, speak, and write basic English. This is a good idea for many reasons, including both from the government point of view and the immigrant. In order to be a successful member of our society, we have decided that it's probably in their best interest for them to know English. However, there is an exception to this rule, that if the immigrant is over the age of 50, we don't require them to learn, read, and write English. Because the thinking goes that they're already so late in years, 1, it'll be difficult for them to learn English, and 2, they won't be able to use it as long. Here's a chart of the legal immigration into the U.S. from 1820 to 2007, pointing out a few spikes. Here we see what's called the golden era of immigration. This is when the greatest amount of immigrants came into the country, oftentimes through Ellis Island and past the Statue of Liberty. You see it went down during World War I, back up during the 20s, down during the Depression, There was less appeal to come to the U.S. when we were in a Great Depression. Not to mention the rest of the world was in a Great Depression for the most part. Therefore, they didn't have the means to come here. And then it kind of dribbles along, but then we see this huge spike in early 1990, about 1990, 1991. That corresponds with the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union fell and Eastern Europe was reopened. Many of those people tried to get away from their former land and go to the U.S. The U.S. took them in. Here we see immigration by national origin. For the most part, up until about the 1940s, it was predominantly people from Europe or Canada. However, since then, it has become more and more from other places, predominantly Latin America, Asian America, a little bit of Africa. We think of where immigrants tend to live. California is a huge place that they tend to immigrate towards. Texas, Florida, New York, lesser degree Illinois with Chicago. And for the ones in California and Texas, that is predominantly, we see them coming from Latin America across the Mexico border. Here we see in Florida a very big population group, and one of the biggest contributors to that would be the Cuban Americans, those seeking exile from Cuba. We have a wet foot, dry foot immigration policy with people leaving Cuba, which is a communist country that the U.S. does not have formal relations with. And so if they can get onto the U.S. land, we allow them to become U.S. citizens. If we catch them in the water, they will have to be turned back. And so that is a big influence in Florida. So what does it mean to lack good moral character? Well, here are some examples that they take as being breaking that rule. If you're drunk most of the time, prostitution, both if you engage in it or engage in it as either a seller or a buyer. If you are lying on your immigration forms, the INS takes that very seriously. If you falsify anything about your past and they find out, you could lose your citizenship years and years later. We see this example with former Nazi guards who tried to come into the U.S., lied about it, and decades later would be kicked out, lose their citizenship. Or just breaking major laws. So we're not talking about a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. We're talking about murder, rape, sexual abuse of a child, any kind of aggravated felony such as violent assault, or the trafficking of drugs, firearms, or people. So the naturalization process. We think of citizenship, swear-ins, taking the citizenship test. But there's more to that. You need to establish residency by being physically present for 30 months out of 5 years. So you could go back to your home country or someplace else, but out of a 5-year span, you have to be physically present in the U.S. for 30 months, or 2.5 years. Or if you're married to a U.S. citizen, it gets shortened to 3 years, of which you have to be here for a year and a half, 18 months. Many people believe that if you just marry a U.S. citizen and you were an immigrant, that you automatically become a U.S. citizen. That's not the case. It just makes the process shorter and more convenient. You need to file a petition, some paperwork if you're over 18. There's an investigation and hearing at which you need to provide 2 character witnesses, 2 individuals who can say that you are a good person, that you belong in this country, and that you share our ideals. This could be, an employer, a neighbor, maybe a relative. Citizenship test is the final part, and the aim here is that each immigrant should be able to learn about their new rights and responsibilities as a U.S. citizen. And finally, there's a final hearing. So at any one point in this process, they could lose their immigrant status and be denied. Very few get through all the way because it is a tough process. Finally, there are ways to lose your citizenship. There's what we call expatriation, which is to give up your citizenship. For example, if you wanted to move to Europe, maybe Germany, and you liked their country and you wanted to become a legal citizen of Germany, you could, and people have done this, go to the U.S. Embassy in Germany, turn over their U.S. passport, and declare, I give up my citizenship and I would like to, end that relationship. Any major crimes that show disloyalty could have you lose your citizenship. By these, we're talking about treason against your government or trying to start a rebellion. Could be basis for you to lose your U.S. citizenship, even if you already have it. And then there's the denaturalization process. We think of fraud on those forms that you might have filled out when you were trying to become a citizen. If that can be proven during the naturalization process, they can retroactively take away your citizenship. Here we have a picture of Benedict Arnold, who is a person from the American Revolution who turned sides and joined the British, and is oftentimes thought of as with disloyalty, treason, traitor. So that's a brief synopsis of what it means to be a U.S. citizen and your citizenship rights. All right, thank you and have a great day.